Hi, folks. John Adamson, the rehab and documentation guru. Welcome to the very first edition of Coffee with Clinicians. I am John Adamson, your host. We've done a lot of videos in the past. We've done some interviews of clinicians that were subject matter experts. And today we're going to take our first volunteer for Coffees with Clinicians. I've got my Starbucks medium roast here. Just to remind you all that if you like my course content, if you like my previous stuff that I've covered, check out Allied Health Education. That's at alliedhealthed.com. And that is a subscription-based service for PT, OT, and speech therapists who are looking to get their continuing education done. One price, as many courses as you want in the comfort of your own home. And most of the live courses are either between 7 to 10 or 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So you can get type 1 and on-demand type 2 CEUs. So without further ado, my first guest for these coffees with clinicians is Danielle Giarrusso, PT, DPT. So welcome, Danielle.
Thank you, John. Nice to be here.
Yeah, I appreciate you volunteering. I just posed this on the Facebook group. What's it called? Like geriatric STOT PT or something like that.
I believe so, yes.
And it's like 45,000 members strong. And so I just posed the question, like, would anybody be interested in just talking, doing like a kind of a unplanned interview? I mean, there's a little planning that's involved, but and you were gracious enough to be my first volunteer, so I appreciate that.
Thank you very much. I'm
So
always happy to chat.
yeah, I'm a talker too. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, first of all, you're a PT, but how did it all start? What got you in the field, and what are you doing now?
Um, my dad came home from physical therapy after he broke his elbow, and he literally said, "You're going to go to school to become a PT." And I said, "Okay." I really didn't know what they did. I had no idea there was such thing as an occupational therapist. Always wanted to be in the medical field, didn't want to do medical school. That was back in the early 90s. I've been doing it 20 years. I did registry therapy for a long time in the state of Arizona, and I fell in love with acute care. I've been in about 60 different facilities. I wish I had kept track now to know the exact number. I've done just about everything except pediatrics and wound care, really. And I recently rediscovered my love for acute care after being in acute rehab for the majority of the past 9 years.
Wow. Daniel, I've heard of arranged marriages, but not arranged careers. So your dad broke the mold on that.
Yeah, it was just like, okay. And you know what? I've never regretted it. School was difficult, I will say that, but it was well worth it. I enjoy my job every day. I recently left a job and took a travel assignment, which ended up being a wonderful opportunity. I'm going to stay on full time. I have great coworkers. The environment's been wonderful, and it is 5 minutes from home.
Ah, very sweet. And now you said you're in Rhode Island now, is that correct?
Yes.
And what part? I know it's a small state, but we know what cities.
It's North Providence, which is north of Providence. It's not actually part of the city of Providence. It's its own separate town. We're centrally located in the state, more northern. Uh, it's near Johnston, Pawtucket. Those would
Okay.
be the surrounding towns.
And did your family grow up there? Is that why you ended up there, or were you in Arizona originally?
No, I grew up in Chepachet or Gloucester, Rhode Island. You said you were in the Boston area. I don't know if you ever heard of No School Foster Gloucester. We were notorious for not having school on snow days. So I only grew up about 13 miles from where I live now.
Okay, very cool. Very cool. Well, as a former New Englander, I definitely understand the draw for being up there. So now you are doing a travel assignment, you said?
Yes.
Okay.
I've always traveled. When I've left a job, I've taken a travel assignment, and it seems to have always led me, not necessarily to stay in that position, but to my next position.
Gotcha. And how about family of your own? Do you have any family of your own?
I have a sister and brother-in-law and a wonderful 1.5-year-old niece. I have my dad and stepmom. I have a wonderful boyfriend. And unfortunately, I lost my mom at the beginning of this year, who was
Um,
an incredible supporter of myself and my profession. She had a few bouts with physical therapy, so she's familiar.
okay. Did your mom support your dad's like basically directing you in what you were going to do with your life?
She did. She encouraged me when school got tough to stay with it. You know, I had invested so much time and effort into school. So I probably wouldn't have stuck with it without it, as much as I didn't
Yeah.
like it at the time, even the encouragement. But yes, she was definitely a big supporter throughout college.
That's great. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear about your mom. I last lost my dad like 3 years ago now, and I just found out my mom today fell and
Oh
bruised her
no.
face really badly. And anyway, so she's getting ongoing, offgoing home health right now. So it's a struggle. And it kind of leads into the conversation you and I were having briefly before we start recording in one of your passions, because my mom, she was living in a trailer once we lost my dad. Money was tight, so she bought a trailer. And now she's in an independent living facility, which provides food and very basic services. But that's about the limit of what she can afford. And so at some point, she's probably going to end up being in a nursing home. She's in Texas, I'm up in Virginia, and she's not wanting to move up here. And I don't have the wherewithal to move down there. So, one of your passions is related to what?
Home modifications, but more specifically, aging in place and providing services to the elderly and physically challenged to be able to remain within their homes and remain as independent as possible. I think that's where our focus should be as a healthcare community, not just as physical therapy clinicians, but I think it would benefit us as a society as a whole and just individuals and the healthcare system. And ultimately, I think the cost savings would be incredible if we invested early on and we educated people, because so many people get to a crisis situation where they end up in the hospital or they end up in rehab and they don't have the money to make the changes that would have been more affordable or more accessible had they done it earlier and when they were healthier and it wasn't a have to do situation.
Now, you've had some experience in this area, and I want to get to a little bit about that, like practical solutions that maybe would be a good basis to start with. But we do know, and we've seen in the news, a growing problem with nursing homes, a growing problem with lack of like CNA availability. We regularly, and you and I are both active on this Facebook group for the geriatric clinicians. We regularly see the posts by PTOT and speech bemoaning the situation with exceedingly high productivity, lack of staff support. It's really not a good situation. So, talk us through a little bit about what you got a chance to see maybe at former employment that helped people age at home effectively, and some things maybe that clinicians can take from this interview with them now, if you think of any good strategies to start off with.
Um, I think as soon as a patient enters rehab, you should start thinking about discharge and making any feasible suggestions. If they were having trouble doing stairs before they encountered their injury or illness, talk them through. Maybe it's time to start thinking about a stair lift. Maybe it's time to start thinking about a ramp. Do it now while you're relatively healthy and recovering, because you're only going to get older. I'm a big proponent, and maybe I do too much educating of my patients, if that's a thing, but educating them that it's only going to get worse or it could get worse. You know, you could need another knee done. You could fall and have another fractured hip. And do it now while you have the funds, you have the family support. If you're thinking about moving and you have the opportunity to get into a first floor apartment with no stairs or limited stairs or access to more resources, take them now. because it's only getting more and more difficult to get them. Um, Trying to plan ahead. I think too many people just aren't aware of what's available to them or what possibly could happen as we age, or the progression of the diseases that they already have and already face.
Yeah, I think one of the problems, and the reason you have to over-educate, so to speak, is because you probably see some of the same problems I have, where doctors, primary caregivers seeing these patients do not do that education ahead of time. But another thing, you kind of alluded to this, some of the times when we educate patients, a big barrier is compliance. And so, what are some strategies that you've utilized to help maybe overcome some of the compliance issues you've seen in your patients? Because you've been a clinician for quite some time now. So, like me, not as long as me, but close.
um, I think one of the biggest barriers is, well, I don't want to look like an old person. I don't want to use the walker because I'm going to look like an old person. I don't want to do that because, it makes me look old. And I think I try to educate that a lot of times these are temporary tools to get us to the next step. Like, you're only going to need the walker for so long, or, you know, you want to get out and see your grandkids. So if you can get in and out of the house now, you'll only be able to do that forever if you put in a ramp. So finding what motivates them and trying to capitalize on that and look at it as a positive as opposed to a negative. Like, yes, maybe you do have to use a walker or a handrail, but if you're able to get down the steps safely and you can leave the house to get the mail every day, which you like to do, then isn't that a good thing?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to pose it to the patient because I'm really big into informed consent. And informed consent, by definition, is shared decision making. And part of that sharing is the patient sharing what their goals, their aspirations are. And so getting the mail every single day, that is a worthy goal. And so whatever we can do to foster that is part of what we do. And obviously, as PTs, you and I are both PTs, our focus is mobility. And even you can argue community reintegration or community access on the OT side is going to be essential. You mentioned to me before we started recording that having been in Arizona and now in New England, you saw back in Arizona kind of more of an inherent infrastructure that facilitated aging at home. What are some of the problems you're seeing in New England now? Because a lot of us live in kind of highly dense populated areas. Of course, there are some rural people, but what do you see as barriers now to the more densely populated areas to allowing that aging at home?
In New England, a lot of older homes, a lot of multi-family homes where grandma lives on the third floor.
Ah,
And it's three flights of steep stairs, probably not up to code, no handrails, and the 20-year-old grandson is living on the first floor. So people just not wanting to make changes, not wanting to inconvenience people. I've had patients that are literally crawling up those three flights of stairs instead of, when they own the home, instead of saying, hey, maybe it's time for grandma to move to the first floor.
right.
Um, a lot of older apartments and condos and senior living that do not have elevators or working elevators, consistently working elevators. There are some stairs to access the buildings. I see plenty of brand new homes going up and they're absolutely beautiful, but they're 2 and 3 floors with multiple stairs to go in the house. And this is just my PT brain going, oh my God, what are you going to do when you get to be older?
Yeah, people just don't think about that when their knees and hips and back are all fine and their balance is good. That's a hard transition for people to make.
And I just personally think that people are not aware. And I feel like I see it every day. So my awareness is a little bit higher than the average person who doesn't work in the medical field. And that's why I look at a house and I go, oh my God, the stairs, I mean, if someone asked me right now, how many stairs to get into your house, how many stairs to your bedroom, those are questions I could answer, and most people don't think about those things. And that's where I think the aging in place and maybe more education at an earlier age, earlier in life could be helpful to people when they're making a choice. Like, hey, if I'm going to build a home, maybe I could do a 1-floor ranch or save the money for a stair lift if I want to do a 2-story and put it in early or have that set aside. We
That's
plan for so many things in life.
Yeah, a lot of people do retirement planning, but they don't necessarily do body planning. Like what what am I going to need to do to take care of my body? Um, you um you and I have seen through our careers probably this. You have a patient who's at home and maybe for a while they're getting home health and they're like borderline, like they really shouldn't be home anymore. But because of finances, fixed income, et cetera, the only outlet they end up with is a nursing home. Like they've got to make that huge jump, that huge transition. Let's talk a
Hmm.
little bit about that. What would you like to see healthcare do to fix that?
I would like to see resources for people to remain in their homes. I think ultimately having an around the clock caregiver would be far less expensive than housing people in facilities. And even assisted living facilities, I do not find are affordable. They're thousands of dollars a month for mostly elderly who are on fixed incomes, and they're just not affordable. And some of these seniors do not have cognitive issues. They may have just mobility issues, arthritis. They can't fix a meal for themselves. And they're going to sit in a nursing home with minimal activities, minimal socialization, or they are in an area where there are people with cognitive deficits, and then the socialization is not what it should be. So I wish that there were more in-home services available. I think it's an area for job growth opportunity. It's just unfortunately not paid for by
Right.
our current health care system, and I don't know what the solution to that would be.
Now, you've probably had some opportunity to have some wins for your patients, like finding out available options for them for equipment and resources. Can you think of, I'm throwing you on the spot here, but can you think of any things that you've been able to witness and be a part of to get people access to things that made it possible for them to stay more independent at home? I threw you on the spot.
You did. I think honestly, just educating them on what's available. I was working in Massachusetts, and we had a service called Bristol Elder Services, and just letting them be aware, like, hey, you may be qualified to receive services at home, and educating them on what was available, what they qualified for, would they be accepting of the services, what the services would provide. I used to have a little handout. So many of them didn't know there was transportation services available. Again,
Hmm.
coming down to education and what is available, where they could get loaner equipment if they temporarily or permanently needed a shower chair that wasn't covered by insurance, a walker if they gave theirs away before the 5-year Medicare coverage was up because they didn't think they would need it anymore. Um, if they needed a hospital bed that wasn't covered by insurance. And I belong to a Buy Nothing group, which is a pretty big movement, I feel like, in social media. And I see things given away all the time. People pass or they no longer need it. And people are willing to give DME away for free. And most of the time, it's hardly used. I know that's what we did in my mother's case when she passed this year. So there's availability of stuff out there if you know where to look and how to get it.
Amen to that. We actually, so I am in the Richmond to Fredericksburg, Virginia area along I-95 corridor, and I did home health for a little while. And we had a ministry up in Fredericksburg area, faith-based ministry that would receive pretty pricey equipment sometimes. And I got a patient a tilt in space and recline wheelchair for zero.
Yep.
And it happened to fit her pretty well because her insurance wouldn't cover it. But sometimes these resources are not available. And it's kind of a good reminder for us, like work with your social workers if you can. If you're in the setting that has social work, utilize them because often they've got the connections that we need to get some additional equipment.
Yes, I agree completely.
Now you're you said you're about to embark or you're embarking on some changes to your career or education. They're going to make you even more valuable as a resource in this area. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing.
So I've recently taken a travel assignment after 9 years of mostly being an acute care and acute rehab therapist. And I've decided I'm going to stay on. I will be one of two therapists for a small community hospital. I also have the opportunity to return to acute rehab as needed. And it's a completely different setting, even though it's the same clinical setting, it's a completely different environment, a different patient base. And I've redeveloped my love for acute care patients and patient care, just the whole environment of it.
And you said you're going to be doing or working towards getting more education on home modification and aging in place related things, correct?
Yes, that's where I would like to focus furthering my continuing education. I carry several state licenses and they all require continuing education. One is yearly and the rest are biannually. And I would like to focus my areas of education on how I can implement it in my current strategies and what I can do to help my patients in my current clinical practice. And if I did tell you that if I ever were to strike out on my own, that might be an area where I would like to develop a practice because I feel like I could make the most impact.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you're bringing up such an important thing. Obviously, healthcare is getting more expensive. We've got an aging population. We've got a reduction in care workers. I mean, the COVID pandemic decimated, especially long-term care. And I know I've read about a lot of long-term facilities that have closed, unfortunately. The economy is not doing well. People are working. Part of the reason our jobs numbers are good is because people are working more just to get
Hmm.
by. So they have less time to take care of their aging parents and loved ones. So this is such a good hot topic right now. One of the things that, this video, I'm going to be posting it to the geriatric Facebook group, and it'll be on, of course, my YouTube channel and on my LinkedIn page. What are some things you'd like to see therapists collaborate with, especially since we have this great thing called social media that would allow enhancements, evidence-based care to be promoted in this area specifically of aging at home? What opportunities do you see there?
Um, oh boy. Maybe more of a focus of it with the education that we receive when we get our degrees, maybe incorporating it more into um, our programs. I don't believe it's part of the program as it stands. I've yet to hear anyone speak about it, any of the students that I've had come through.
Hmm.
Um, it's still pretty much the basics. And I know that they're requiring more and more education across the board with OTs and speech. Physical therapy is already a doctorate. Um, and maybe a more interdisciplinary collaboration between speech and OT, PT, as far as aging in place. I don't know if there could be an establishment of an agency to specifically do that, to consult. Um, how do I want to say? Like offer consultations for anyone who's interested. Are you having trouble swallowing? Try taking a sip. Try cutting your food smaller. Are you having trouble with buttons? Obviously, these are not my areas, but I know these are common complaints with patients who come in, maybe for just a broken hip, but you find that they have dysphagia that's been untreated and undiagnosed. You find that they're having ADL problems at baseline. I really do think that part of our future is going to be more consultation based than insurance reimbursed based.
I agree, and I think you're bringing up some really good points. Danielle, I just noticed, and this is my Zoom limitation, unfortunately, my meeting is going to end soon. So
Okay.
I apologize for that because I wanted to broach the subject of advanced degrees with you, maybe some other time. But
Okay.
so Daniel, how can if you want people to reach you, how can they reach you
Um,
if you want?
probably probably the best would be on Facebook or LinkedIn under my
Okay.
name, Danielle Giarrusso, Giarrusso. And you can always shoot me an instant message and just tell me why you're contacting me, and I'd be happy to connect.
Excellent. Well, so Danielle, I really appreciate you joining me on this very first episode of Coffee with Clinicians. Folks, reach out to Danielle. We were talking about building up her LinkedIn. Shoot her a bunch of invites to link up on that. And if you have a common passion like she does for aging in place, maybe this will be the start of something beautiful, collaboratively between all of you. So, Danielle, again, thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, John.
All right, and everybody, take care and God bless.